Case number 2859 on the consent agenda has been tabled until the special meeting tomorrow. And case number 2862, Walker & Walker Enterprises site plan has been tabled as well. Are there any other changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda.
Move that we accept it as presented.
I have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. All in favor? Commissioner Riddell, how do you vote? You're muted if you can hear me.
Blink twice.
All right, we'll come back and see if we can get Commissioner Riddell and Commissioner Murphy. All right, minutes from the April 11th, 2022 meeting. I hope you had time to review those. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes proposed?
Yeah, I've got one change on number 4. It has me as recused, and I wasn't recused. I think I voted yay.
All right. Any other changes? All right, and did you get his vote? Sorry.
Just so you know, Joseph Murphy has joined us.
All right. Commissioner Murphy, would you just test your audio for us real quick?
Yes, sir. Hurry on.
All right, appreciate it. Commissioner Riddell, are you able to speak at this point?
I'm here.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Great. Hearing no further changes to the minutes, I'll accept a motion.
I'll move to accept them with the change I noted.
I have a motion to approve the minutes with the proposed change. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All in favor? Commissioner Riddell, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Ben, do we have a staff report today?
We do not.
All right. Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have two cases on the consent agenda this evening. Case number 2857, John Albritton has filed a request for a special exception as provided in section 3.5.8.2, residential common interest developments, districts permitted for property located at 515 and 523 North 11th Street. In case number 2858, Bradley Robertson for Oxford School District has filed a request for site plan approval for Bramlett Elementary addition for property at 225 Bramlett. If there are no comments on the consent agenda, I'll accept a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Riddell, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy?
Yes.
Thank you. Our first public hearing this evening will be a public hearing for case number 2860. MFM Development LLC has filed a request for final plat approval for Colonnade Crossing Phase 2 for property located at north of Mississippi Highway 30, east of White Oak Lane, west of Ferndale. Robert?
Okay, so again, the subject property is located in the Colonnade Crossing subdivision, and it's at Concordia and Bainbridge, which will be internal to Colonnade. The applicant is proposing to construct an athletic facility with a gym and office space on that property, the site plan of which will be the subject of case 2859 in the special call meeting tomorrow. The request is for final plat approval for the single lot. It measures about 1.6 acres. The proposed lot meets the dimensional requirements of the underlying zoning, and subdivision covenants have not yet been received and will be required prior to the issuance of permits. Engineering has provided comments related to water and sewer, traffic and access, sidewalks, and stormwater management. Of note is that there is essentially a capacity analysis needed for the water system that has not been completed at this time, and we're not going to allow this to go before the mayor and board before that is complete. But staff does recommend approval of the requested final plat for Colonnade Crossing Phase 2 with the six conditions that are listed in the staff report.
Thank you. Commissioners?
Engineers on the line if you don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions?
Yeah, tell me more about this water issue.
I am going to defer to Rihanna on that.
Rihanna, could you tell us more about the water issue for this property? We might give her just a minute.
Well, I guess maybe this is more, maybe you guys can answer this before Rihanna, but why are we even considering this if there's not even if there's a question of whether or not we have the capacity to provide sufficient water?
I think part of it is where they tie into the water and whether they have sufficient capacity at the spot that they tie into. But we'll have to get
Well, all right.
Are there, while we wait for her to get online, are there other questions? All right. We'll give her just a minute.
I apologize. Can y'all repeat that? I just stepped in, Triana. Sorry.
No
Hey,
problem.
Rihanna, this is Kirk. I mean, the question I had is, why can you tell us more about what this water situation is? And maybe JR explained it, but just don't understand why we're even considering it if we have an issue of water supply.
We anticipate that with this, that we're going to get an answer that says basically that it can either develop, that the water demand, we can handle all of the supply, or it'll give us some sense of scale. We are considering this, just trying to continue forward progress instead of stopping the entire development at this phase. We approved the previous phases because we did feel like there was a small enough demand that we could handle that. But we've been working and notifying the developer for several years now that we were going to have to be sure that this was not going to be an issue. And so we're trying to keep moving forward. And at this point, I don't think that one site more should make an issue. I don't expect that. But we want to know, and we want to go ahead and not continue to keep. We want to allow this site to move forward enough to go through the site plan process and be ready for the answer we get. But we also don't want to just keep working without having the numbers and everything confirmed.
Rihanna, I think part of Kirk's question was just to understand what the basic issue was. Is it that they're only tying in to a main at one spot and you're not sure if that main's sufficient to supply the water?
No, it's that the issue, the location where they're tying in is part of a pressure boosted system. And so we've got to make sure that this area is not going to require so much water that our pumps can't address the pressure requirements that are needed. This line, this pressure boosted line, serves Oxford Commons.
Okay.
And some other areas. And so we've just got to make sure that we're not going to create an impact on this line because of the demand that we're requiring, that we're not going to be able to maintain our pressures in our other areas.
Well, and that was the question that I came to thinking back when the Kiami's bowling alley caught on fire and we lost water throughout city because we didn't have enough sufficient capacity to pump it all. Are you saying that there is an option to provide water from somewhere else, or are we going to get to a point and have to stop it later?
There is an option to provide water somewhere else. And so, and we've just been trying to find out if we're going to have to pursue that option. Obviously, it would be more expensive for the developer. They would have to run, additional mains. And so we're just trying to find out if that is going to be required or not. It's not, Kiami's was a series of very, very unusual events, but we just want to make sure that in our day-to-day operations that we're able to maintain the pressures that we've got to for Oxford Commons, with the hotels in particular, like the upper floors.
Anything else?
No.
Any other questions?
So is that the developer's responsibility or the city's responsibility?
It is the developer's responsibility regarding, the fact that if they want to connect in an area that we cannot provide, if they want to connect in an area that requires improvement in order to receive services that we don't have budgeted, the developer is required to make those improvements. It is something that if the developer were to say, you know, I want to develop in this area and have this connection, when would the city be able to provide me a connection there? And then we might could look at it and say, well, you know, we might could budget that in 10 years and wait. But the issue here is that the developer wanted to connect at this point in time, and this is the point of connection that they were asking for, rather than connecting somewhere else. So, and when they began this development, they could not provide us with the demand that they needed for the entire development. They did not yet, could not yet provide us with an idea about what was going to go out there. So it was not something that we could answer regarding what improvements would be necessary without knowing what they were building. And it is something, as we continue to move forward, depending on the assumptions that are made and the findings from our water model, if our water model comes back and says we can handle six times the demand that they're requesting without any impact, then we'll know that it's highly unlikely there would ever be any further improvements required of this development. But if the model comes back and it says you're borderline with these, then we will know. We will continue to monitor it as additional phases come on.
Is there something about this site plan which brings this into question?
It is that we told them before we would approve any of them. We've been working through this, and so it's not anything about this particular site plan. No, it's that this site plan is another phase, and so we've been requesting this information for so long, and so we want to go ahead and get this done because we feel like what's about to happen is obviously this momentum is going to start building, and so we want to get these answers, get these questions looked at now before we also are staring down phases 3, 4, you know, multi-phase development or something else larger scale. So it's just that we've stated in multiple cases in previous instances that we've got to know these numbers. And we just don't want to keep allowing things to go without us knowing what we're really looking at.
Just to clarify, this is a plat. It's not site plan. I mean, it's a minor thing. We do the utilities with the plat, but just didn't want people to get down the site plan road.
Okay, sorry, I
No,
didn't mean to misstate. I just, you know, don't understand why it's even getting this far. But
Well, Rihanna, is it, I mean, I think what Commissioner Milam is trying to get at is what's the level of concern here? I mean, are we confident that they can, that the city can supply the amount of water, or that, that there can be an access agreement worked out? Or is this something that we're concerned about?
We anticipate that it's going to be worked out. However, once the final plat is approved, then that tells whoever's purchasing property there that services are available. And without a bond in place for some improvement cost, the city would then be responsible for getting water there. So, for example, if this final plat were to go to the board now and the final plat is approved, and then our water model comes back and says, well, y'all, we really are going to have to make these improvements before anything else can be built here, the city would be financially responsible for that unless we had a bond in place. So that's the reason that we don't want to approve the final plat. And we anticipate having an answer soon. We just have these provisions in place as it's going to the Planning Commission. And again, the reason that we're here tonight is just trying to, recognize the developers trying to move forward and trying not to be a hindrance in the process, but also trying to put those checks and balances in place so that we don't lose the ability to, make sure that the citizens of Oxford are protected from costs that we otherwise would not have to put on them.
Okay, so in the current conditions that we have, number 5 says that water service cannot be guaranteed. And number 6 requires a performance bond. Robert stated in the staff report that this wouldn't go to the Board of Aldermen until the water issue was worked out. Do we just need to go ahead and put that in condition number 5?
Yes, and the bond that is referenced in that report is the bond for the street infrastructure, and for the water main, for the sewer main, for the sidewalk, for the street light. That's what that bond would be for that's referenced there. That's not a bond for if they have to extend the water line in a different location.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
the engineer for the project, John Granberry, has his hand raised. I think he wants to chime in.
Yeah, John, please. Go ahead.
How y'all doing this afternoon, board? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is John Granberry with Granberry and Associates for the record. A couple things I'd like to say and add to what Brianna said, and I understand everybody's concern. We did not, as the developer and the development progressed, we did not know that the water demand issue would arise this soon, early on in the development. We were under the impression, we knew early from the beginning that the overall development may have some water issues and concerns. The city had the concerns, but we honestly did not know that these water demand issues were going to arise in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. We have, because of the nature of the development, the size of the commercial development, we haven't been able to accurately predict and estimate demand. We just recently provided the city with the demand model estimation of flow that we think is an actual accurate prediction of what could be developed out there. That's one reason that the city's been behind with their modeling, is they were waiting on numbers for us. One thing I will say is what we would like to see is some capacity that the city could provide so that we can prepare for whatever improvements will need to be made. If we're going to be responsible for upgrading the line, tying or connecting to a different location, some other point in the city, whatever that is, we need to be expecting it. I think where we are right now, we won't even be able to see another site plan, even on phase 1 that's already been approved, move forward and through the approval process, and without everything going through what it's going through right now. So we'd like to see some available capacity that the city has, so that, like I said, we can plan for some capital expenditure if need be to, make improvements that the city's going to require.
Thanks, John. You mentioned, well, how many phases are y'all anticipating?
Well, I mean, it's all dependent on what size development, what the need is, what comes in. Where
I'm going with that is what you've already proposed in this plat. What proportion of the total demand that you sent to engineering does that represent, roughly? Do you know?
It's very small.
Very small. Okay.
Yeah, I can tell you what it is, though.
Well, I guess where I'm going with that is I just wanted to hear from Rihanna. I mean, if we're this concerned when we're at a small proportion of this development, what the plan is for future phases.
Agreed.
Right. So again, I feel like that this particular site plan, which this particular building use does have a small demand associated with it, but that's for that specific site plan. But the plat is not tied to a site plan use, and so even if they get a plat approved even if they get a site plan approved right now, there's no guarantee that that's what's built. But once the plat is approved, that guarantee of services available is there. So we have put this stop in place because, again, we want to make sure before the plat goes forward that we are sure of where that water will be served from. And so that's kind of where we are. Again, I don't anticipate this particular site plan is going to be an issue, but we want to know where we are before we go any further. And again, we've tried to allow as much progress as we could in the past. We've tried to move things as much as we could forward and give as much as we could comfortably do. And we just reached that point now where we had to see the numbers. We had to know what we were looking at so that we could plug that into our model and see. And I do agree with Mr. Granberry that my hope and expectation is that when we get our information back from the model, that we will have some numbers associated with it, much like a traffic study, that says, well, you've got this many trips available. I do hope that we'll have something that says you'll have this many, there's this many thousands of gallons available. I don't know yet.
So let me just follow up on that for a second, because John Granberry's estimated what he thinks their demand will be. We're plugging that into the model for the city to decide whether the current level of service will meet that. But there's a passage in the report that says basically that neither the engineer's estimated demand nor the city's estimated ability to meet it are binding. So, is there, can we give him a number that is an absolute max or something to work with?
I hope so. And the number that they provided was for the entire Colonnade Crossing development, which is what our consultant engineer said in 2018 that he needed. I think it was 18, could have been 20. I think it was 18. He said then that he needed to know the demand for the entire development. He had already built the model with all of the pipe network, but he needed to see what the entire demand was for the development. And so that's what's been provided. This use for this small little particular site plan is just one number that's been plugged in with that entire development. And that's what we're trying to look at, is to see where are we. And that was the question that we wanted answered in 2018, but we couldn't get an answer at that time. And so that's what we've been trying to work forward. And so again, we moved forward incrementally as much as we could. And I hope that when he reports back that we'll be able to see what that impact is. And he may report back that there's zero impact and, he went ahead and, ran, 3 times the demand or to see. Yeah. But we won't know until he reports back to us.
Okay, let me take a quick stab at summarizing this so that maybe we can move to a conclusion. So from what I understood, and John and Rhiannon, I want you both to give me feedback on this, is that there's concern about the capacity to provide water for the full development. There's not really concern about the capacity to serve this particular site within the development. But the city wants to make sure that we have the capacity for the whole thing as we get started. And John Granberry has already supplied an estimate of what that total demand would be, but the city hasn't had a chance to run that through the model. Is that all correct?
The only clarification that I would just say is until we get this report back, and John Granberry and I had this conversation, this report may come back that we've already exceeded demand and that I have already made a mistake by allowing it to move forward to this point. That is something that could come back. I think we would probably have been seeing that. But then again, we don't have anything built yet, so we don't have anything, using water and everything complete. So that's the point that I would just clarify is.
Okay, so we are worried about this site.
Now, yeah, we don't know anything about the impact of this site, of any portion of this site, It's just been my judgment to allow it to move forward through this first phase, through these first couple of sites. And I was willing to step out on that and say, I feel like I was willing to go that far to allow the first bit to move forward while we were waiting and trying to get these numbers, recognizing that there was so many things on the front end that they were trying to get moving. And so that's where I am now, is that I'm not, because he could come back and say that I've already messed up, or he could come back and say, you can build 4 of these and you're not going to have any issue at all. We just don't know yet.
All right.
What are we talking about? I mean, if I'm confused. This still concerns me. John says he needs to know a number, and you say you need to know a number from John. How long will it take for the two of y'all to get together and work this out?
We've already provided the information that John provided to the city. We've given that to our consultant. He said it should not take long. He did not quantify that number, and we've also had him tied up a little bit working on some pumpkin water modeling for us as well. So I don't have an idea of when it could be. I could have the answer tomorrow, and that was another reason to allow the planning commission to hear this part, knowing that it cannot go to the board until we get the final answer determined, because I expect the answer will come in relatively soon, and I feel quite confident that Mr. Granberry will be emailing and calling and requesting that we bump the consultant more, just check in and say, when are you going to have these numbers? I don't have them yet.
All right, thanks. John?
Yeah, I have provided the numbers to the city on estimates to clarify. So they do have
Yes,
that.
and we have given that to our consultant. It's just under review right now.
All right.
And furthermore, like you said earlier, JR, to what we would really appreciate, and I don't understand why it's not available, but a capacity that's available for us so that we can program when we need to spend money on capital improvements. So how much do we have available?
Yeah. Understood. Commissioners, anybody else have a question or comment? To me, it seems like, there are some technical issues that need to be taken care of between the engineer and the city. For this particular case, I think the question hinges on whether the commission is happy to use condition number 5 to mediate the problem, or if we think that the situation is just not ready for this to be approved. Any comments or questions?
So the provisions that are in here, are they strong enough to where the report comes back?
Yeah, I think,
Everything's got to stop and, we'll.
But what was that you said about neither is binding, something about it's not binding on either side? How does that have teeth?
so we did talk to Rihanna about adding to condition number 5 that it wouldn't go to the Board of Aldermen until they worked out the water issue. The part that I was referring to in the report is just that, I think it was aimed at alleviating any concerns that the engineer's estimate provided would bind them to that number or less or something like that.
Okay.
It doesn't.
That's what I'm
It's
asking.
just giving the city something to work with and vice versa. It seems reasonable that the city could plug in arbitrary numbers and get an idea of what the capacity is, what the limit on capacity is, but we haven't done that yet, and I think it needs to be done to provide the engineer with something, an upper limit. All right, is there a motion on this case?
Make a motion to approve with the 6 staff recommendations with conditions.
I have a motion to approve with the 6 conditions. Is that, just to clarify, on condition number 5, is that?
With the addition of.
Okay, with the addition to condition number 5, that it would not go to the Board of Aldermen until the water issue's worked out. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. All in favor? Commissioner Riddell, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy?
Yes.
All right, it is approved. Thank you all. Case number 2861, Walker & Walker Enterprises LLC has filed a request for special exception for ground floor residential as provided in section 2.6.7 for property located at South Lamar and County Road 322.
This piece of property measures about 30, almost 32 acres, and it has 3 zoning districts. There's a very small portion, it's about 2.5 acres in the southern portion of the property that is T&B, and then there's about 10 acres in the middle that is neighborhood residential, and then there is a larger portion, nearly 19 acres, that's traditional suburban residential. The applicant is proposing a multi-type residential development here. And in the portion, the southern portion that's T&B, there are 5, I guess there's about 6 units that, 6 buildings that are really affected by this, that they would like to request ground floor residential for some quadplexes in that location. There's some topography that's driving the case there, and then they also believe that the viability of commercial at this site is probably better at that southwest corner of the site, where it's at the intersection of South Lamar and County Road, I believe it's 322. So the request is for a special exception to be able to have ground floor residential units here. And the applicant's engineer is here if you have any specific questions, and I can entertain any other questions that you might have.
So Ben, are we swapping designations, like putting a new designation on that south or whatever the corner that the commercials moved to?
No, the commercial would still be, it is still in the T&B. It's just a portion of this, they're requesting the special exception that's already provided within that T&B for that
Okay.
ground floor residential.
All right, just making sure we're not rezoning.
No, we're not.
Thanks, Ben.
Yep.
Any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Riddell or Murphy, any questions? All right.
No.
No.
Does anyone from the audience wish to speak on this case? All right. Hearing no comments or questions, I'll entertain a motion on case number 2861 for a special exception for ground floor residential.
Motion to approve?
I have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Riddell?
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy?
Yes.
The special exception is approved. Case number 2862 has been tabled. Please let the record show that Commissioner Milam will recuse himself for case numbers 2864 and 63. Our next case is case number 2864. Mid-States Petroleum LLC has filed a request for preliminary and final plat approval for Mid-States Petroleum subdivision located at Buddy East Parkway South. Robert?
All right, so this is located at the southwest corner of FD Buddy East Parkway and Highway 6. The applicant is proposing to construct a service station at this location. The special exception for the use of a service station is the subject of the next case. The request is here for a preliminary and final plat for a single lot subdivision of about 1.25 acres to remedy an illegal subdivision of the land. The proposed lot meets the dimensional requirements of the underlying zoning, and subdivision covenants have not yet been received and will be required prior to the issuance of permits. We have received an access easement for the ingress and egress. Engineering has provided comments related to access, water and sewer, and stormwater, and we'd like to note that access will not be granted directly to the lot in consideration, but the access easement previously noted will take care of access to that lot. Staff recommends approval of the requested final preliminary and final plat for Mid-States Petroleum with the 6 conditions that are listed in the staff report. And the applicant's engineer is here if you have any questions.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Riddell, Commissioner Murphy, any questions?
No.
Does anyone from the audience wish
No
to-
question.
Oh. Commissioner Murphy, do you have anything? Sorry.
No, I was just saying I did not have a question.
Okay, thanks. Anyone from the audience? All right, hearing none, I'll accept a motion on case number 2864 for preliminary and final plat approval.
Motion to approve with the,
A motion,
with the 6 conditions.
motion to approve, subject to the staff conditions. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Riddell.
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy.
Yes.
All right, it is approved. Brings us to case number 2863, Mid-States Petroleum LLC has filed a request for A, special exception for structure height, and B, a special exception is provided in 3.8.10 service stations for property located at Buddy East Parkway South.
This is for the special exception for a service station. That's the request here. And the subject property, same piece of property that Robert just spoke about as part of that plat, it's 1.25 acres. The applicant is requesting the ability to have a service station in the T&B zoning district. Based on conversations with the engineer for the applicant, they are proposing at this time they are proposing a 2-story building, or a building that would comply with the 2-story requirement, 51% of functional space at the 2nd floor. The applicant indicates that this is an ideal location for a service station, and it will provide an asset to the neighborhood that's around it. And included in the packet are conceptual plans at various perspectives, and then also some elevations that they have put together. The standards for a service station, whether they're approved as a special use or a special exception, are still the same. They're included in your packet. I do want to call your attention to a few of these. In this instance, because the property or the gas station would be on a corner lot, the pumps are required to be on the side or in the rear of the property, unless they butt residential. But in this case, they're positioned in the side, which would be compliant. We are lacking a site plan. We do not have the ability to look at a site plan, so it's difficult to determine whether or not the application would comply with some of the requests. So if you see the build to line requirement, we do believe, based on the easement that was provided, although it's a little bit difficult to read, we do believe that on the south side along Highway 6 that I said the south, I meant the north side. The north side, it would comply with that build to line, but it does appear that it does not comply with the FD Buddy East build to line based on that easement. It's difficult to tell, though, without an actual site plan. The fuel pumps are required to be 20 feet from the property line. Again, it's difficult to determine whether or not this proposal complies with that requirement. There's something here for, a service station that has auto repair. In this instance, that doesn't really apply. Pump islands shall provide adequate stacking space for one vehicle behind it. Again, it's difficult to determine whether or not this submittal will comply with that requirement. The pump island and canopy should be architecturally wrapped, consistent with materials of the building and color scheme. At least the vertical support arms for the canopy do have a wrap according to one of the elevations that they provided, but there's been nothing done with the pumps. And then we don't know if they're going to have any outside display items, so it's difficult to tell whether or not they comply with that. There was not a lighting plan that was provided, and then also any screening, there was nothing submitted. So staff does have concerns with the lack of information that was submitted with this request. We do, again, it's our understanding that this will be a 2-story compliant building. However, the renderings that were provided indicate a 1-story building. The east facade of the building does not seem to comply with the land development code because it's just a solid brick wall, and that would be required to have an architectural front. So there's several things in here, landscaping, edge plantings, foundation plantings. There's a pole sign that's indicated that's no longer allowed. Monuments would be required. Again, staff's not opposed to the idea of a gas station at this particular location. We think it makes sense given the nature of it being highway commercial, and the access was of earlier conversations and concern to city staff, but that seems to have been resolved. But we do have concerns with the lack of information that was provided or not provided with this request, and therefore we do not recommend approval at this time until we can have additional information.
Thank you, Ben. Just to clear it up for the record quickly, when I introduced the case, I read an earlier version of the agenda item, so it is only for the use and not the structure height that I read. Any questions from the commission?
And Jeff Williams is here if you have any questions.
Great. Commissioner Riddell, any questions?
No, I'm just concerned with the lack of information and the lack of site plan.
Commissioner Murphy, any questions?
No, not specifically.
Okay.
I would agree with the sentiment that the lack of documentation is a concern.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think from my point of view, we have 3 levels of permission for uses in the city. There's permitted by right, permitted by special use, and special exception. And special use usually carries with it additional conditions like this, and if they meet those additional conditions, they can put the use on the property. In the case of a special exception, they're often the same list of additional conditions, but then beyond meeting those conditions, it has to come before us. So from my point of view, they haven't met the additional conditions yet to come before us. So, Jeff Williams.
Hey Ben, this is Paul. Real quick, you and I have talked about this before. Isn't it the case that we removed the provision of the Land Development Code that said you couldn't come back within 6 months if you had a special exception denied?
That's a good point.
I think it's still there for variances, but not special exceptions. I just want the commission to be clear on that before they take action, or so that the applicant has that information.
Yeah, Paul, that provision has been removed, yes, so you're correct. If the commission did take action, then a request could come back next month or in subsequent months.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Does everybody understand?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a couple of comments. I understand the, what's provided, and Ben and I have had a lot of discussions about, basically, we're asking the developer to do a site plan just to get the use. There's been some discussion about not being able to do anything once you get to site plan, but you could absolutely turn all of those things down. I don't want to discuss that. I understand the situation, hadn't met the letter of the law, so I would ask that we table this special exception request till the next meeting.
Can I have a motion to table?
Motion to table.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Riddell?
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy?
Yes.
All right, it is tabled, and Ben, if you would include that on the agenda for next month, as long as,
We'll work with
Okay.
Jeff to make sure that, when they're ready to come back, then
sounds good.
we'll have it on the agenda.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to case number 2865. Could we get Commissioner Milam to return? Case number 2865, the City of Oxford has filed a request for modifications to the Land Development Code. Ben, I hope you brought popcorn. I hope you brought popcorn.
JR, you didn't just say you had the munchies, did you?
I did not.
Oh, sir. certainly one of the more interesting items that we've had before the commission, and even as part of my career. So in February, I'm sure the commission is well aware that the governor did sign into effect the Mississippi Medical Cannabis Act, and that legalized medical marijuana in the state of Mississippi. It provided communities, jurisdictions with 90 days to make a determination whether they would opt out of the requirements, and there's a process. There's a very long process that we can talk about, but it had 90 days to opt out. Our community has, at least the city leaders have not indicated that they are going to opt out, and as such, we've been working on the regulations to insert into the Land Development Code based on the state law that's been put into effect. It's a little different because the regulations, you know, there are multiple layers of regulation at the state level. The Mississippi Department of Health is involved in this. The Mississippi Department of Revenue is involved in this, and also the ABC is involved in this, and they're all tasked with coming up with their own regulations, and those are slowly rolling out. We did see Department of Revenue release theirs earlier. I think it was earlier this month at the late April. So we've started to see these items roll out, but nonetheless, we've continued to have conversations internally about what this would look like for the city of Oxford, and where we're at is before you. And again, I just want to remind you that in Land Development Code or ordinance modifications, that the commission is a recommending body to the mayor and board of aldermen. So regardless of the action tonight, whatever your recommendation is that you would like to send forth to the mayor and board of aldermen, that will be taken into consideration, and then ultimately the mayor and board of aldermen will hear not only, you know, the introduction of this, but then also have a public hearing and take comment from the public going forward in the coming weeks, and then they'll make a final determination on you know, whether or not to approve, modify, or deny this. And so, as such, you can see the uses taken directly from the legislation itself, and if you do want to reference what each of these means, we do have a definitions provision. It's just numerical based on the articles of the Land Development Code. So you can see what each of those uses mean. There's cultivation facility, so that's a grow facility, and they have different tiers based on the sizes of the grow facilities, but all of those are required to be indoors. And we're proposing that that would be a special use inside of the industrial district, which we do have limited industrial district zone land, but we do have some, and we do believe that that would be a suitable use for that district. Also, there is the concept of vertical integration, and so where you have multiple uses within the same facility. So I think in some places you'll see grow facilities and grow facilities and processing facilities and dispensaries that could be located within the same building. And so, you know, we can't necessarily conceive of the particular instance where it might be appropriate in a particular zoning district or it might not, and so we opted to allow for a special exception for consideration by this commission. In my discussions with people that are in the industry, it's not that common to see, at least from, you know, my perspective, my very limited perspective, my very limited conversations. It doesn't seem to be that common to see, you know, facilities like this because of the potential for product issues. You might have a fungus that comes up in, you know, the cultivation facility that might, you know, spread over into the processing facility. So it's my understanding that they do like to keep some of these uses separate, but not necessarily all. So a special exception for a cultivation facility, a dispensary, would be allowed by special use in the TNB, suburban corridor, suburban center, urban corridor, urban center, and the industrial districts. Cannabis disposal facilities would be a special exception in the suburban corridor, suburban center, and industrial districts. Cannabis processing facilities would be special uses in industrial and at special exceptions in the TNB, suburban corridor, suburban center, urban corridor, and urban center districts. Cannabis research facilities would be special uses in the suburban corridor, suburban center, urban corridor, urban center, and industrial districts, and special exceptions in the traditional neighborhood business district. Testing facilities would be allowed by special use in the industrial district and special exception in TNB, SEO, SEN, urban corridor, urban center. Transportation facilities would be special uses in industrial, special exception in TNB, suburban corridor, suburban center, suburban corridor, and the urban center district. We do have parking requirements. In general, they would be 1 parking space required per 300 square feet of patron area unless otherwise determined. And in a few of these additional standards, you'll see that we did require them based on employee load at the largest shift of the day. So you see the additional standards for the cultivation facilities. I think the big thing that our research has indicated is to make sure that there is a odor prevention plan in place, especially at grow facilities and disposal facilities. So you'll see this incorporated in several of these uses, and the burden will be put on the applicant to come forth with that plan for us to evaluate, or the commission to evaluate, to make sure it is adequate. The state law does require they do have distance requirements in a couple of scenarios. So number one, for a dispensary, actually it's distance requirements for dispensaries, but in two types of scenarios. Number one, the distance between a dispensary and another dispensary has to be 1,500 feet, and that's measured from the point of entry of both facilities. But then also when you're within proximity, close proximity to a church, a daycare, or a school, the dispensary has to be at least 1,000 feet away from the point of entry of the dispensary to the nearest property line of the school, church, or daycare. Now, there is a waiver provision that's in place, or the ability to have a waiver by the church, school, and daycare. So all three of those have the ability to waive those. There is a form that is required by DOR. They've actually pushed that out to us earlier today to make sure that we had that. But you could, a school, a church, or daycare could reduce that to 500 feet. I'm looking through here to see if there's any...
Ben, who would sign that waiver for the school?
I think the
superintendent, or?
I think the superintendent would likely be the person that would do that.
Just curious.
I imagine the board would have to approve that or give the superintendent the authority to do that.
I would think so too.
Okay.
Yeah, he would have to have specific authorization to do that, but
yeah.
Yep. So you see the list of additional standards that are in here. I just think it was, on the processing facility, just it's kind of like the microbrewery where we talked about, byproduct or waste being stored outside of the facility, at a cultivation facility to make sure, and a processing facility to make sure that is, not at a cultivation, at a processing facility to make sure that that's not stored outside of the property. I think that would be important because there is odor associated with that. That is something that we have heard from other communities in other states. And then in Article 10, you'll see the list of definitions that, actually mostly were all provided through the legislation at the state level. So,
Ben, because it pops up so many places, the odor provision plan. Have you talked to anybody in any other communities that, what that is? Do they have any definitions or standards, or is it a guy standing out there with an air freshener?
I've talked to people in communities outside of the state of Mississippi that already have facilities like this, and everything that I hear from them is that ventilation is critically important to all of these businesses, and so from the business plan, they're taking a look at that as well. There isn't, so far that I've come across, any set standards as to what specifically ought to be required. And I think that that's something that we're going to learn as we go through this. You know, I think we're all going to have to evaluate that. But I think where it matters most, you'll see her in the cultivation and the processing and disposal places, and in most instances, those uses will be special exceptions, and so then there's going to be a higher level of scrutiny from this commission. We're going to want to make sure that we have that you know, fully vetted before we approve one of these facilities.
Mr. Chairman, let me just jump in too, and Ben has done a great job in how he's teed this up in the draft language, and I'm sure the commissioners all understand this, but for anybody else who might be listening, I just want to make sure that everybody is super clear that you may not open a medical cannabis facility of any kind unless you go through the state and are appropriately licensed through whatever departments you have to go to. And that is not something that the city of Oxford has control over. We don't even have all those regulations yet. So that, if y'all vote to recommend this, if the board votes to put these zoning regulations in place, that doesn't give anybody the right to open one of these facilities, and it certainly doesn't give anybody the right to say, start selling marijuana over the counter in the coming days. Not that anybody would think that, right, Ben?
That's right.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the Department of Revenue has, I think, done a very good job of trying to help communicate that. You know, so they have, you know, whole checklists of things that you have to do, and one of those things, even before they'll consider your license, to make sure that you have the appropriate approvals from the municipality or the jurisdiction that you're proposing this. I know that there are some other communities in the state of Mississippi that propose that you have to get the state level approval before you could get the city level approval, and that's not necessarily how the legislation reads, and that's not necessarily how the Department of Revenue has set the process up. It's supposed to be get the appropriate approvals at the city level, and then ultimately they make the determination at the you know, whether or not to approve or deny that license.
So Ben, I have a question about the districts. I mean, it's basically all of our dedicated commercial districts and industrial that these facilities are allowed in, either by special use or special exception. One question, was ag not included because we don't have any, or because it was explicitly left out?
Yeah, I think if we have a property that becomes zoned ag at some point in the future, then we would modify this ordinance to include that. But yes, because there was not any zoned agricultural property in the city limits, I didn't see the need to go ahead and include that.
And then where would a planned unit development fall in this? Is it excluded because it's not explicitly in there, or would it fall under the underlying zoning? How would that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I've gone back and forth of PUDs and TNDs, and ultimately, you know, I thought that the underlying zoning, you know, would prevail, but I suppose we could include that in the language to incorporate. And this is where it gets difficult, because, you know, so if you have a PUD, does that mean that you could, you know, propose one of these inside of a residential area of a PUD? You know, and Paul, please chime in if you have any guidance on that, but I just thought the underlying zoning in a PUD and the commercially designated areas of a PUD might make the most sense. Now, we could incorporate that and modify this to take to the board that says, you know, the commercial areas, or the areas of underlying zone, or the commercial areas of a PUD and in TND, you know, may request this.
I think that's probably right, Ben. What we have typically done, since we have revised the PUD process, is defaulted to the regulations that fit the underlying zoning for anything that's not specifically mentioned in the PUD plan. Of course, what you could also do is what I've been telling you to do for years, and never approve another PUD again, because they're nothing but headaches, but that's a horse of a different color.
Thanks, Paul. All right. Any other questions?
Didn't even get a smile out of Judy.
Commissioner Riddell, any questions?
I have a question that's just more general, like the so many feet from from one of these establishments. Okay, say one is there, and then 3 years later, a daycare wants to open 400 feet away. The daycare is not allowed to open?
No, the daycare has
No, that's a good question, Judy. That's moving to the nuisance. If you are a church or a daycare or a school and you make the decision, but we see this all the time because there's similar restrictions for bars in the state of Mississippi. You have to be so many feet away from daycares or churches. But if you come into the area and make the decision to locate there, then that's on you.
Okay.
It's a good
I got it.
question. We've even been discussing that, just weighing all options here in all scenarios. It's a good question, Judy.
Yeah, so it's essentially acknowledging the presence and waiving it by virtue of choosing to locate there. Okay. Anything else, Commissioner Riddell?
No.
Commissioner Murphy, any questions?
No, sir, no questions, sir.
All right. Would anyone in the audience wish to speak on this? No? All right.
Guess you didn't need your popcorn.
It's not. Hearing no further comments, I'll entertain a motion on case number 2865, request for modifications to the Land Development Code.
And just a reminder, this would be for a recommendation to the board.
Yeah, this would be a recommendation for approval or not to the Board of Aldermen.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All in favor? Commissioner Riddell, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Commissioner Murphy, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right, it is approved. No further cases on the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion, is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
You're adjourned.